Hi everyone. In this video we're going to cover volumetric modeling in Maya using Bifrost. Volumetric modeling is a technique that's been around for a long time. It is sometimes referred to as Metaball geometry. And the basic idea is that we can either take a series of points or geometry objects and create a field around them. And by sampling that field to a finer or rougher threshold, create a new mesh around the existing points or objects. So they are sometimes called, this is sometimes called Metaball modeling because it's very often done with points, and then the meshing around the points results in a series of spherical objects that get glued together. So balls that get glued together into a new shape. And with Bifrost, we can use even more. This is pretty cool. We can use more than points. We can use geometry. And that's what we're going to go over in this video. So in this video, we'll cover how to go from, let's say, meshes. So this is a mesh that I exploded using the Shatter tool and then Bullet. And from that mesh, we can create a volumetric model. And let me turn Bifrost back on. We can glue that together. And then I'll also show how to get this mesh out of Bifrost. I'll show you how to retopologize it using a couple of tools in Maya. This is the Remesh tool, and then from this Remesh tool, we can go to the Retopologize tool, which gives us a much cleaner mesh, which we can then down the road texture. So that's what we're going to be going over in this video. And let's just look at Bifrost quickly, because I can show you that underlying this mesh is our mesh object. So this is the exploded mesh that we have put into Bifrost. And turn Bifrost back on. We can sample this mesh. I'll be showing how to do this, but with the volume to mesh node, once we've turned it into a volume and turned it back into a mesh, we can sample it. And we can, using the level set threshold parameter, either create a mesh that's very close to the original mesh. So if I take this down to 1, you can see that the new mesh is very tight on the object. And then if I take it to 3, it's chubbier. And if I take it to something like 5, it gets even bigger. And if I keep raising this, it's going to, at a certain point, turn into a total blob. And so we have options here to determine the kind of mesh we want to make using the level set threshold. And there are other parameters that we can that we'll cover as well. And of course, having made this little Bifrost script, I can use other meshes in it, other meshes with it as well. And so you can see I have another exploded mesh here, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull that one over. And you can see that then I can use those same settings for this one and play around with this one with the level set threshold. So making it blobbier or making that new mesh tighter on that object. And of course, if I go back to this mesh and edit it, I can update the Bifrost mesh as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let's just save this. And I'm going to start a new file and show you how to do all of this. All right, channel box editor. So I'm going to start by just creating a simple polygon primitive. Let's make a platonic solid, dodecahedron. These are my settings here, subdivisions 1, radius 1, no spherical inflation. I'm going to hit apply, close that. Now I have this little guy down here. I'm going to go ahead in the channel box, take his scale up to 10. And now I'm going to raise them up a little bit and run Maya Trinity, freeze transformations, delete history, or set it to the pivot, freeze, delete history, freeze the transformations here. Okay, so now this object. Okay, next we're going to go over to the effects. We are going to use Shatter. And I'm going to use the solid shatter. shard count 20, edge jagginess 0, seed value 0, and triangulate surfaces. I'm just going to delete the object and hit apply. This is going to run, and it should crack my object. Okay, close. Now I have my new object here, shattered into a bunch of pieces. Right click, go to object mode, and we can see what happens if we pull this apart, right? So we can just pull this apart manually, but I just want some distribution of fragments here so I can go directly into Bifrost. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. We're still in effects, so I'm going to go to bullet, and I'm going to create a rigid set from this object. And let's see what happens when I hit play. It explodes apart, and then I can rewind it. And you know, that's probably going to be good enough for what we need to do here. I don't think we need to mess with gravity or anything like that. Okay, cool. So having done that, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, what do I want to do here? I want to grab this mesh, Control D to duplicate it, and I'll just move it out of the way. And everything else over here, I'm just going to delete. Delete over here the bullet solver, and I'm left with this thing. Run the Trinity on it here, move it back over, do that again. Okay, so now I have all of these pieces, and I could pull this right into Bifrost, but I also want to maybe move some of these pieces around. And if I go to object mode here, I'm in object mode, face, yeah, like basically I can only select faces when I'm out of object mode. So I need to break this object apart and then pull it back together. If I go to the modeling toolkit, which you can toggle on and off here, and the modeling toolkit, I could separate this, but because I'm pulling this out of bullet, it's going to separate into a bunch of faces, and I want it to separate into these chunks. So to pull the faces together, first of all, I'm going to right click this, assign existing material Lambert. So I have everything the same material. Select this mesh. I'm going to go back to modeling, mesh, and let's see, edit mesh, and merge under edit mesh. By default, this should be the threshold. Reset it. Yep, 0.01. Merge. That should be fine for this. Okay. Now I am going to go to the modeling toolkit. Now that I've merged those vertices, I can separate. And now you can see that I've separated this, and let's go ahead and select all of these objects. And now each one is a separate thing. So I could then hit the E key. I could rotate these things around a little bit more. I could move them apart a little bit more if I thought, okay, this mesh is going to be a little bit boring because things are too close together. I'm just like going to spend a few seconds here. You could always come in here and delete things if you don't want. I'm just editing this a little bit, so I hopefully get a more interesting mesh out of the volume operation in Bifrost. So kind of building, and I could always go back and edit these later. Now you can see here that there's some errors in our mesh, and but because this is not the final mesh, we don't really care. We're going to go ahead and just ignore that. So I have all of these things in a group here. I'm going to go ahead and edit, ungroup that, and I get all of these meshes. I'm going to grab these things, go back to the modeling toolkit here, and combine them. It's going to put them into one mesh, and I can freeze. Center the pivot, delete the history, freeze it, and now I've got this very clean thing called Polysurface 21. All right, now this is all one mesh. If I right-click this, multi-UV shell. No, it's not going to give us anything. I thought maybe we could still select these sub-objects, but we cannot. I think, though, with face, if we double-clicked that, yeah, if we go into face mode and do a double-click on these objects, then we can grab these whole chunks. So if we want to edit this later down the road, we can do it that way. All right, but now we have a clean mesh for Bifrost. And we can go to the Bifrost graph editor. If you don't have Bifrost open, you can come to Windows, Bifrost graph editor, and open it there, and then I always have it docked over here. We also discovered that this parameters editor can get turned off, so if you ever need to, if you're ever missing that, you can turn that off here. All right, I'm going to create a new graph. Excuse me. First thing I'm going to do is grab our poly surface here, pull this over, and now I have this in my graph. I can delete this input. We don't need that. Okay, and I could just keep this open for now. All right, so we need to turn this into a volume and then turn it back into a mesh. All right, so what do we want to do here? Tab. We are going to set this volume mesh to volume. So this is the first thing we have to do. And then we're going to turn it back into a mesh with another command called volume to mesh. Right? And then that can go to our output. So we've got our basic input, polysurface shape 21, mesh to volume, volume to mesh, and then this can, when we're ready to put it into Maya, we can use this output. All right, so what do we want to do here? We can, first of all, plug this mesh in, right? And the first thing we need to do in the mesh to volume parameters is we need to store level set, and we can unclick store fog density. Okay. The critical thing here is going to be the resolution and the detail size, but we'll come back to that. By default, it's set to relative, and then the detail size is set to 0.05. Okay, and then we want to take this to volume to mesh. And the critical settings here will be the property threshold. Let me pull this out more. The property threshold, and then the detail size scale to a lesser degree. So we're going to show that in a second. All right, so now let's turn this on. So here, volume to mesh has this great little proxy preview window. So now we can see what we're getting here, and this looks pretty good. Now we've got this mesh, Metaball, volumetric, implicit mesh around our objects, right? Kind of gluing them together. And what can we do with this? Well, we can change the resolution over here. And the resolution is going to, by default, be set to relative. Now we can also set it to absolute, but we have to be very careful with this because if we set it to absolute, it's going to create a mesh that is based on the scale of the absolute scale of our Maya units. So we're in centimeters, so this is going to be a 0.05 centimeter mesh size. So that could be really, really time consuming to construct. So if you switch it up to absolute, you want to go ahead and maybe take the detail size up to something like 3 and then change it to absolute and then start taking the scale down. Or we can also just keep it in relative, and it's going black because it's making this big mesh around my objects here. Because in relative, the scale needs to be much smaller in order to control it. So you can kind of see here what playing with relative does, and absolute, whether it's absolute or relative, we can get, I think, similar results here. It's just that the scale is going to be different, right? So we can keep these as, we can turn these shard-like things into smoother objects like this, or we can start to glue them together with this with the detail size. So that's the first level of control we have. There's also the let's see, volume mode solid. We want it to set it to that. So, the offset. Let's see, we can also kind of tweak things with the offset, but let's just leave that to at the default here. Okay, so what can we do over in the volume to mesh component now? In the volume to mesh, we have a lot of control. There's the property threshold, so we can, it's not doing much. The detail size scale. So this is also going to control the density of the mesh. And you can see here that, let's see, by lowering this number, I get a smoother mesh. So by taking it, what was it by default? Go back to 0. Detail scale size to 1. And then if I redo that and take it down to 0.15, you can see that I get a much smoother mesh here. So this is an important thing. So maybe let's set this to something like 0.2 so we get this smoother mesh. And now we can go back up to the property threshold because this is the big one. This is really, if you imagine that there's a field that's created around, if I turn off our Bifrost graph, all of this geometry is being used as an input for our volume, and each one has a charge. And so with our charge here, hide that again, we sample the field that's created around each object, the charge that's created around each object, and then we return a new mesh based on the sample. And that sample is controlled by the property threshold, which we can raise here. So by default, it's set to, is it set to 0.05? Let's take this up to something like 2. Oops. How about 5? Why is this not? Oh, I am so sorry. It's not the property threshold that we want. Let's go back here. 0.05. Okay, cool. It's the level set threshold. Sorry about that. By default, it's set to 0. If we set this up to like 5, for example. Okay, there we go. You have to play around with these values. So here, a value of 11 returns a really big blob. Let's see if I can go into like an X-ray mode. So we see those objects inside, right? And if we want the mesh to be tighter on those objects, we can like set it down to 5, and you can see that each object is basically getting an envelope around it and creating this new mesh. And so the lower we go, like something like 2, and at a certain moment, these objects drift apart, right? So they don't have, they're not even connected anymore. And then as we raise this threshold, right, they glue together. So that is the classic Metaball behavior here. Let me turn this back up. Okay, cool. Now we have this interesting thing. So again, depending on how your geometry is spread apart or close together, you can get these kind of cool things by playing with the level set threshold, and they can either be more connected or less connected, and you can play with this. And of course, even if I wanted to move the original geometry around inside, and if I could get in there and grab that thing and to go to face and double click these things, and it's selected in there, and if I rotate this thing, right, it's actually going to change the geometry from Bifrost. Okay, cool. All right, so that's the basic overview here. And so again, the critical settings are in mesh to volume here, right? Definitely make sure store level set. So let's go ahead and just create a little frame that selection and create a backdrop for it. And store level set. Right, so we want to make sure that the store level set is checked, and then the critical settings here are the detail size, so we can play with that here. So 3, 2.3, right, and then also the level set threshold here. That's the critical one, along with the detail size scale. Now the detail size scale is controlling, I believe, the fineness of the mesh. So it's not really changing the shape, but we can have a finer or less fine mesh based on that. And then also in mesh to volume, the thing that we have to watch out for is our resolution mode. It's going to start out at relative, and if we want to use absolute, then we need to, click that. If we want to use absolute, then we want to make this detail size larger so that we don't use too low a value relative to the Maya units and then crash Maya. Okay, cool. So right now, obviously, this is still just our Bifrost graph. And let me shift H. Okay. And if I want to connect it to, if I want to get into Maya, I have to use the output here. And then whatever, this is popping up as meshes, but sometimes this is out points, whatever this text is, if there's a mesh there, if you right click on this text, you can create a Maya mesh. And that is going to create a mesh that is in our modeling window. Now this mesh by default is still connected to Maya, or to Bifrost rather. So if I change things, this is going to update. If I want to break that connection, I need to come to poly modeling and then again, center pivot, delete history, and freeze the transformations. And that should, oops, break that connection here. Now let me just make sure that's true. So if I change my level set head threshold to 5, yep, okay, great. So those things are unlinked, and now I can do whatever I want to this. All right, so what else might I want to do with this? Okay, well, if we can see that the triangles are a little uneven here. So one thing I could do is I'm just going to create a Control D, create a, oops, this is one. Oh, my hotkey does not seem to be working. Do I have caps lock on? No. W. Okay, there we are. I was just pressing the wrong hotkey. Okay, moving this thing over. So the triangulation on this is pretty even, but we can play with that further with a really great tool under modeling. We need to go to mesh, and there is Remesh. So let's click Remesh, and I'm just going to use the defaults. So reset settings, hit apply. What did that do to our object? Okay, so it made it much denser. And let's go over to the attribute editor, and we'll see here that until we delete the history on this object, we still have access to this remesh node. And this is where we can play with the max edge length. So this setting, if we raise it up, and maybe we can take it up to even like 10, right? And now we actually have a much more even triangulation, and the triangles are much bigger. So this is also a way that we can kind of smooth out or even change our geometry a little bit after the fact by playing with this max edge length, right? So I'm going to set it to, and it also makes the triangulation very even, so that's great. So I'm going to take this like to 4. Maybe to 5. I don't want to lose too much detail, but it is nice that it's kind of smoothing this thing out. Okay, so once we have that, I'm going to duplicate him, Control D, bring it over, F for frame, move in here. What if we want to make this a quad mesh? Okay, now after I'm happy with the remesh here, it's important that we delete the history on it. This guy too is going to be fine, I think, but we'll just go ahead and do that. And then center on this one. Okay, so there's another command called Retopologize, and this is super powerful. It's super powerful. It can also take a long time. It shouldn't take very long with this mesh. I have the heads up display here, and it's telling me that I have 12,000 faces on this object, so it's not so bad. Only if you're getting into 50 and like 100,000 faces, then this can take a long time. But what we're going to go to here is Retopologize. But before we run that, we're also going to open Windows and open the output window. And the output window is actually going to show us the progress of the retopologization, because it can take a long time with really complicated meshes, and you can think that it's actually, sometimes it fails, but usually it's just cranking away in the background. And so you don't lose faith that it has just stalled out. You can turn on this window and it's going to show you all the progress. Okay, now we can go to, Retopologize. Oops, shoot. I wish I had not done that. I'm going to hit escape here. Oop, it did a nice job. But let me just undo that because I want to show you the correct way to do this. We have 12,000 faces here, and let's go to Mesh, Retopologize, open the setting here. Okay, and the target, so 12,000, so if we want to reduce the number, we can change the target face count to something like 5,000, but maybe we want to increase the number, we can also do that as well. Maybe we just want to increase it or decrease it a little bit, so maybe what I want to shoot for here is 10,000 faces, right? And so I'll set that, hit apply, and somewhere I have my output window, and the output window is showing me what's happening here. And I don't think this is going to take real long. Okay, cool. And it's done. So this is great. Turn this off. And now we have this really smooth mesh. Oops. Oops. G, actually, I hit the G key, which is repeat a command. And I wanted to hit the F key, which is focus, but that's okay. Didn't take very long to do that. I'm going to hit undo. And now we have this thing. Because I'm going to center the pivot on this. There we go. Now I should be able to fly around it. So this is looking really, really clean. Now, one thing that is really important once you've done Retopologize is that you want to definitely delete the history, because if you just close Maya now and reopen it, it's going to rerun the, I've got this cool hole in my object here now. It's going to rerun that command, and that can take a long time. Of course, if you want to experiment with the amount here, we could take this down to 5,000. Until we delete the history, this is going to be live, and you can test with like how low you can go on the face count before you freeze it. So it doesn't look like we're really losing much detail, and of course, if we texture this, this is going to be pretty cool. It's not going to matter. We don't need a good gazillion faces here. What's the last thing I might show you here? If you want to get this heads up display, we can under display, heads up display, and poly count. That's where you find this information. So if you want to toggle this on and off here under display, heads up display, and I can turn that off. Or display heads up display, poly count, turn that back on. And that can be really helpful when you're dealing with these really complicated meshes. And yeah, and then, based on Bifrost, I guess, if we're thinking about how we could use Bifrost and, creatively, we could even think about, okay, well, we've got these two meshes coming out of Bifrost. What happens if we now take these guys, duplicate it, combine these things. But we could put another mesh around that. But maybe what I'll show you in Bifrost is another thing that we can do with volumes, right? So let's just go ahead and let's Boolean subtract this object with this object. All right, so we've got these things over here. Bump, bump, bump. Just delete all the stuff on them. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. Oops, did not work. Control C, Control V. Mesh to volume here. Do this again. All right, now we have this mesh and this mesh. So this mesh, I'm going to pull this one into Bifrost. This one, I'm going to pull this one into Bifrost. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that one and that one. Okay, so now we've taken these two meshes and we've pulled them into Bifrost. Okay, now we have our volume to mesh. So let's grab that. And let's see what this gives us. Okay, and our original mesh here, so maybe we want to make our level set threshold something more like 1. We want to stay closer to the original object, or maybe even 0. Okay, and 0 should get us closer to that original object, right? And let's see, what does that original object look like? Shift H. Let's hide Bifrost. So we might even want to shrink this down. Let's turn off the... They're pretty close, but you can see that the Bifrost mesh is hovering over that. So let's take our detail size down to something like 0.1, like it's 0.5. Oops, maybe I overdid it there. Oh, that's pretty good, actually. Then that's getting us much closer to the original shape. Let me turn off that. There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Though it's going to be a little slower, but that's okay. I'm going to turn this mesh off. Let's go ahead and delete that one. And now that I have this setting of detail size, or let's do something nicer actually here. We have this resolution size, right? And we want to control these things. So it's going to take a minute once I plug this in. Mesh to volume. And what I want to do here is, based on this resolution, we have the detail size. That's a critical parameter. So I'm going to right-click this and create a value node. And it's going to take a second to recalculate because it's treating it like a brand new thing. But it creates this output, right? And resolution, cool. I can pull this one into this detail size. Mesh 5 shape, let's make say Shift F. Okay, we've got that one. Shift H, Control H, hide it again. Okay, cool. And now we're controlling this, we can control the resolution of both of these at the same time. And if we want to preview that one, let's plug this one in. It's taking a minute. It's the preview that takes a long time here. Okay, cool. Looks like I've got them both plugged in. Oh, Shift H. Hide that one. How this is plugged in twice, I don't know. Delete that. You get that little knife by holding on Shift Alt. Okay, cool. And all right, so now both of these seem to be working pretty well, and I can kind of toggle back and forth between these things, theoretically, if Maya behaves. So it's cranking, see what happens. Or we can plug them both in, and that's nice too. Okay, great. But now I don't want that anymore. I'm going to just turn that off, and I'm going to delete that. Okay, we can do volume booleans, and we do that with the merge volumes command. So again, I can get the commands or nodes by hitting the tab key and then type merge volumes. And I can pull this one in as the first one, this one in as the second one, and I want to set my level set mode here to difference, and that will create a Boolean difference. And let's, oops, don't want that, P. Okay, and this shows how one is Booleaning out the other. And let's just take this one down here because I want to see my cutter. I'm just waiting for it to refresh. So we can see the way that that one's going into that one and how it's, so let me turn off both of these. And turn on both of these. And then I can think about, okay, how do I want this thing? Maybe I want this thing to be smaller, or yeah, maybe smaller. And rotate a little bit and bring it down, see if it does anything cool. I would kind of pull it in more this may not actually result in anything interesting, which is just how it goes when you're working like this. Sometimes you don't know what's going to be cool. And so what we can do here is see what that does. Now it's not giving us a great display, but it does seem like I have a kind of interesting void being carved out of that. So I'm going to say, okay, that is cool enough. Then I'm going to come back here. Let's turn that off. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to Control D, duplicate. Oops, does that even work? Does not seem to work. So Control C, Control V, copy that one. Now let's pull our volume to mesh. Sorry, I've got my merge volumes. I copied that volume to mesh. Node. Volume to mesh, and why is it not giving us? Maybe because the sample is not great. So I'm just going to delete that. We know that this is creating something, right? Oh, why does it not create something anymore? What did I do? That's weird. To delete something. Huh. Hold on. Let me just hit undo several times and see what happened. Or maybe I'm just not, like somewhere not seeing it. Okay. Hold on. Let me hit Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. It was all going so well. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Let's see if we got something here. It's thinking, so that's a good sign. All right, I feel like there's gotta, I think I just like maybe zoomed out or something here. Let's hide all this stuff. Just this is the merged volumes, and we're setting it to difference. Let's hide all these things. Oh, it's Bifrost. Troubleshooting here. What is that thing? This is the volume to mesh. Well, don't want to see that. Maybe that's what's. What am I actually looking here? This is the output. Okay, so there's that one. Where are you, guy? Huh. So weird. I don't know what happened. Anyway, that's annoying. Hold on. Let me pause this thing. All right, so I don't know what was going on. I think maybe I was just looking in the wrong place, but it was there, and it is Boolean. So we are now just going to go ahead and tab, make a new volume to mesh component. And so now that we've merged these volumes, we can kind of see what they're doing with that, but now we can see much better with the volume to mesh and preview that. And now we can see how one object, this one, Shift H, is cutting a hole in the other one, and we're getting this kind of void in it. All right, and again, if we want then to get this mesh, this Boolean out, and of course here in the level set threshold, we could continue to play with, if we want to like take that up to 5. Right, we get, I don't know why we would want to do that, but we can play with the resolution of this mesh as well if there's something that we need to tweak here. So, but by default, it was set to 0. So there we go, we'll do that. And of course, we are not looking at the mesh at all here. Oops, so mesh wires, we could change the detail sets scale size if we needed to. If we wanted a less dense mesh. And then to get it out into Maya, tab, output, grab that, right click meshes, oops, right click this word, meshes 1, create Maya mesh, and create some mesh 6. let's center the pivot, move that, F, frame it, and then we can delete the history, freeze the transformations, and we could do all of the things that we did before, like mesh, remesh, get a more even poly count on it, and then we could go to edit mesh, where is it, mesh, retopologize, let me take this down to, I don't know, something like 8,000, retopologize. Let me pause while this is going on. Okay, we're back, and now we have this nice smooth mesh, which we could use for texturing. All right, so thanks for watching, appreciate it, and I will catch you next time.